Hi, in this video I want to show you how to light your outdoor scenes in Unity. We will talk about setting up lights and choosing colors to add the mood. We'll look at how we can convey different emotions by strategically placing lights and following the principles of lighting and get the effect that we require. And you can see that this is the final result. Before we start, I want to thank Dustlight Creations and you guys for your constant support. It means a lot to me. So let's get started. I'm going to be using this free Slavic medieval environment by Image Art. Link will be in the description below. So just go ahead and import this package. I'll just clear the console and then I'll open Slavica free 2002 version. And right off the bat, you can see that there are some things you need to fix. So just to fix this, you go to material and then drag in the water material. And let's disable the fog temporarily. To do that, we go to window, rendering, lighting. Oh, I already have it here. And then go to environment and then uncheck fog. And now you can see that this is too bright for us, but we'll be changing it soon. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create an empty game object, call it environment. On the inspector, I'm going to reset it and then drag all of my props into this environment game object. Next, I'm going to delete the directional light so that we can start from scratch. And the final thing that I'm going to do is set up a good camera position. I really like this camera position. You can copy the values if you want to. I've also adjusted the field of view to 66 and I'll also remove these two unnecessary script components. And we're going to light this outdoor scene. Okay, let's start. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this Skybox. So we go back to lighting and then click on this and then search for none. And you can see that the only lighting here is this ambient color here. So the first thing that we need to do is actually mess with a bunch of lighting settings. Let's just get it out of the way so that we can focus on the more important bits, which is the lighting. So first, we go to Edit, Project Settings, and we go to Player, and inside Other Settings, we go to Color Space and set this to Linear. Gamma works best for the retro effect. If your game has a retro art style, choose Gamma, but in most cases, choose Linear. And I find the baking times to be significantly lower when it comes to linear. So it's going to import a lot of stuff. And we're done here. We also need to create a lighting settings. So let's right click, create lighting settings. Let's call it global lighting. And we go to the lighting tab, go to scene, and let's actually drag and drop this lighting settings here. The first thing that we need to do is to enable mixed lighting. And by mixed lighting, we're going to enable both real-time global illumination and baked global illumination. We're going to set the lighting mode to shadow mask. It should be like that by default. And then we'll change the light mapper, which is how Unity bakes our light maps. And we're going to change it from progressive CPU to progressive GPU if you have one. If you don't, just go with CPU. We're going to change the light map resolution to something like 20. Use 40 if your meshes are a lot more realistic. In this case, it is low poly, so you don't really need a lot of light map resolution. I'm just going to go with 20. I recommend starting with 10 and then work your way upwards. But I think 20 would work best for such a scene. And then we'll change the light map size from 1024 to 512. Because the art style is low poly and we can pretty much get away with a smaller resolution, I highly recommend doing it. And we are done with settings. So let's create a lighting setup. And we're going to be using the 3-directional lighting setup. It's very similar to how 3-point lighting setup works. But 3-point lighting setup is mostly used to light a subject. But in this case, I'm applying the same principles to light an entire world. Alright, so what it essentially does is we're lighting an object, or in this case, the entire world, from 3 different directions. Alright, with 3 different directional lights. So the best way to explain is to actually do it. So we're going to right click, create a light, directional light. And a directional light is basically like the sun. It applies light throughout the entire scene along this particular direction, as you can see from this symbol here. So if we try to rotate this, you can see that the way the light affects our environment is getting changed. And we are going to call it key light. Okay. Now we're going to choose a direction for this light. I really think that this rotation for my light works best because only the rotation matters for directional lights, we can pretty much place it anywhere. For the settings, the color, I like to go with something that resembles the sun. So it's going to be of yellow hue, and then we're not going to shift it to yellow because it would look very weird. We're going to only shift it a little bit closer to yellow, not that much. So it's just going to be a very subtle yellow, alright? The mode is not going to be real time, it's going to be mixed. So real time is going to be a lot more expensive. Baked is going to be a lot more faster for the CPU. But baked lighting doesn't have any effect on dynamic objects, which means objects that can move. For example, our player. So if we use mixed lighting, we're going to get baked lighting on our static objects like the buildings, and we are going to get real-time lighting on objects that can move. For example, the player or the enemies. So we're going to choose mixed lighting. Let's set the intensity to 1 and let's set the shadow type to be soft shadows. Next, let's duplicate this light. Let's call it the fill light. And what I like to do with the fill light is basically subtract 120 from the y-axis rotation. So the key light faces this way and the fill light faces 120 degrees towards the left. Now this is where colors come into play. Let's go to the color and let's analyze this for a bit. What I like to do is think about the colors in our scene. So you can see that most of my colors are green here and there's a little bit of yellow, which means that my hues probably come around this range, right? So what I'm going to do is select a color from the opposite half of this circle, which means somewhat towards pink or blue. I think I like pink because it's a little bit warmer. It gives a little bit of warm light to the rocks here. And obviously I'm going to play around and make it a lot more saturated just for the effects. Okay. And we are going to decrease the intensity of it. We're going to set it to half of the intensity of the key light. So it's going to be 0.5. And you can see it's really subtle, but it adds a little bit of purple glow to the sides. And this one is not going to have any shadows, and that's it. And the final light is going to be the rim light. And this one, we're going to again subtract 120 from the fill light's Y rotation. So if I go to the top view and then select all these three lights, you can see that it basically creates an inverted Y shape. All right. So that's what I'm aiming for. And for the color, we're going to pick the second half of the other side of the original colors. So it was pink before, we're going to go to the other side and choose something like a blue. All right. And we're going to reduce the intensity to 2/10 of the original intensity. So it's going to be 0.2. Of course, it's not going to have any shadows. Now the thing is, we're going to select both rim light and fill light and change the mode to baked. So it's not going to give any lighting on the player. This is just to add color to the mesh. So if we go ahead and enable and disable this light, you can see that it adds a little bit of depth to the scene. This is going to make more sense once we add the Skybox. So let's add it. We will be using Fantasy Skybox free for our Skybox. Link will be below. Now the color of the sky will decide the mood of the game. If we use the default Skybox, it's really good, but it's not the mood that I'm looking for. It doesn't convey a story for me. This looks like a very fun game to play. If you look at the game view, you can see that this looks nice. All right. This looks like something that would work best for a management game or a simulation game of some sort. So such a lighting could be useful for making games that do not need to focus a lot on the story. Instead, we're going to go and change the Skybox. We're going to go to Cube Maps, FS013, and choose the Sunset Cube Map. And we're just going to drag and drop this into the scene. And already you can see that it lights up the scene a little bit red. This actually conveys a little bit more emotion, right? And there's a lot of warm colors that's being emitted from the sky. It's usually used to indicate things like sadness or really strong emotions like anger or death sometimes. If we unsaturate this color, then it usually becomes more about death or grieving. So you use warm colors to convey an emotion or a story. All right. And we usually use bright, cool colors to represent calm, energetic feelings. This is not always the case. You can still use cool colors to represent emotions. And we're going to make it a lot better by adding fog. So we go to lighting, head over to environment, and then check fog. And this looks very weird. We're going to change the mode from linear to exponential squared. And this looks even more terrible. But if we choose the color, select this eyedropper, choose this red, and then reduce the density to 0.01, look at that. So let's increase this to 0.01, maybe 3? Yeah, 0.012 is a very great value. And you can see that it immediately changes the entire mood, right? You can see how it was without fog and how it is with fog. Absolutely brilliant. You must use fog on an outdoor scene, especially if your world is quite massive. There's nothing else to do with the fog here, and there we go. Now is the time when you could create point lights and spotlights in your scene to actually decorate it. I'm going to skip this step because it's relatively straightforward. Just keep in mind that if you're doing so, try to keep the light mode to baked, and if you want that light to have an effect on the player or the moving object, use light probes in your scene. Now, I'm not going to talk about it in this video because it's not going to be as beginner friendly, because placing light probes needs a lot of practice. However, a light probe is something that I would recommend you to look into, and if you want me to make a tutorial on it, please do let me know in the comments below. The most important bit is to actually click on this environment and then change everything into static. Yes, we're going to change the children, and it's going to take a while, but what we essentially did is actually made everything static, alright? So this is important once we start baking our scene. Because we are using mixed lighting, we need to specify each mesh in our scene as static, alright? Otherwise it's not going to create light maps for them. It's going to treat it as if it is a moving object. We need to specify objects that would not move in our scene that contains renderers as static, alright? And the final thing would be to add post-processing. So we'll go to Window, Package Manager, we'll go to Packages and select Unity Registry. And if we scroll down, you can see the post-processing package and click Install. This is going to take our scene and visuals into the next level. So let's just quickly apply some post-processing. So we right-click, create a game object. We'll call it post-processing or PP. I'll just reset this and we're going to add a post-processing volume. Right off the bat, we're going to add a layer called PP and then assign this layer to the game object. And this is important. We're going to assign post-processing to all objects. So we need to check is global. Then let's go to the camera and we need to add a post-processing layer. It automatically sets the trigger as the camera, and we need to set the layer to PP, alright, for optimization purposes. And then once we are done, we need to create a post-processing profile. So if this is too much for you, this is something that you get into the habit with a lot of practice, alright? And there is no other way around it. Once you use post-processing a lot, it's going to be second nature. So we're going to call it post-processing, and we'll go to the PP game object and then drag and drop this profile. We'll go to the profile and we can now add effects and it will be applied to this layer. So we're going to add an effect. The first thing we're going to add is ambient occlusion. And you won't be able to see anything because everything is unchecked. So select mode, select intensity and increase intensity. So we could change the mode to scalable ambient obscurance, and I'll reduce the intensity to something like 0.6. Perfect. So you can see that ambient occlusion just added a little bit of crispness to our image here. Another effect that I would recommend adding is the bloom. Let's check the intensity and just increase the intensity. And you can see that the sun lights up just a little bit for us to have that extra oomph to the scene. Alright? If you had other light sources in your scene, those would also bloom as well. But that would be too much for this tutorial. We're also going to add depth of field. Because this is a huge scene, depth of field would be a great effect. So if we open it up, check everything except for max blur size, and then just play around with the values until the farmost edges just starts to blur. Now you can see that this is a very subtle effect. So these are the values that I'll use. And the final effect would be color grading. And I'm going to right off the bat enable saturation and contrast. I'm going to increase the contrast to something like 8. I'm going to increase the saturation to something like 5. Okay, 5 is a bit too much. Let's tone it down to 3. And you can see the effect it has on the image. It pops out various colors so that we can get a desired emotion. I'm also going to check temperature and play around with it. And let's also play around with the tint. And there we go. We have proper color grading applied. One final tweaking is with the fog. I'm going to go back to the environment and I'm actually going to make it a lot more thicker. So something like 0.14 would be nice. And the final thing is to actually hit generate lighting. And this is going to bake all of your light maps, everything, and make it a lot more optimized. All right. So this is going to take a lot of time. I'll see you when it's done. So this is cool. We can see that we have completely shifted the entire tone of this image from the very beginning. Earlier on, it was just a happy, fun little game. Right now, it looks like, there's a lot of action going on. There's a lot more emotions and sadness and a little bit of hope that is being represented in this image. I really like what I'm seeing here. And this is how we light an outdoor scene. If for some reason your baking does not work, then go to resources. You may get a warning here that you may have some overlap UVs and stuff. First, select all of your mesh from your resources. And then in the inspector, in the import settings, you just click on generate light map UVs. And then open it. For the margin method, you set it to calculate. All right. And the minimum light map resolution should be the light map resolution that you've set in your lighting settings, 20, right? If it still doesn't work, try increasing the resolution so that there's more space for the light map to be baked on. And if still that doesn't work, try to open each mesh in Blender, try unwrapping it, and make sure that there aren't any duplicate vertices in your mesh, all right? This took about 1 hour and 5 minutes for me to bake, which is a decent amount of time because there are a lot of objects in this scene. Of course, you can optimize this. We can reduce the samples, the resolution, and there's a lot of things that we can do to reduce the baking time. So that's it for this video, and I hope this was useful. I'm going to be making another video on indoor lighting in Unity. This is an outdoor scene, and the way you light an indoor scene is completely different. So I hope you will subscribe and stay tuned for that. Thank you very much for watching. So take care. See ya. Bye bye.